Welcome back to another episode of Cali Pods. I'm your host, Bryce Haslem, and our guest today is my dad, Josh Haslem, and he's going to tell us a bit about his journey into entrepreneurship. So go ahead and just introduce yourself and tell us kind of why entrepreneurship appealed to you and what getting into it looked like.
Okay, so like Bryce said, I'm his dad, Josh Haslem. I'm 47 years old. Um, Entrepreneurship, I think I kind of got into it early on because my dad was an accountant growing up. Seemed like a very boring job to me, and maybe that's why he always had a little side hustle going on. So he had little side businesses. We had a hot air balloon business. He was a hot air balloon pilot. He was a scuba diving instructor that I got to help him with. We had a paintball business that we did. And then he was into all kinds of various multi-level marketing things like Niken and Amway and Melaleuca and everything under the sun. And so seeing that gave me the idea of, you know what, I think maybe I could do that someday, have my own business. And so that's kind of what planted that seed in me, I think, from when I try to think back to what gave me the drive or the desire. I think that's where it came from initially. And also, I never liked the idea of working for somebody else, being stuck at an hourly rate and being capped, being limited.
Yeah.
No matter how good I was at that job, even if I outproduced everybody else, I was going to make a maximum of whatever I was making an hour. And so I didn't like that. And so entrepreneurship appealed to me in that way, that I kind of controlled my destiny. Like it was, I had the power and the control to be able to make what I wanted to make. So
Yeah,
that's
for
kind of
sure.
what I would say sparked it, I guess.
And so, practically, how did you apply that? So, what business did you go into?
So the first business I got into that gave me kind of a taste of it was I was going to school in Idaho Falls to be a dental technician because I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I was 21 at the time, 21. Um, and I had a friend recruit me to sell pest control in California, and I didn't even know that was a business. And I was looking for any excuse to get out of there. And so I said, okay, I'm out of here. Let's go. And so I went out there and I was a subcontractor where I sold on commission only. And in doing that, I was able to see how the marketing company worked that I was working for. And so I kind of learned how that looked and behind the scenes, so to speak. And that got the wheels turning in my mind of, you know what, I could do this. I could start a marketing company, and I could recruit my own sales guys, and I could find a pest control company that wants to grow, and we could pitch them the idea, and voila, we could start a marketing company. And so that's what I did. Started a marketing company called Orion Marketing. That was my first business. And it was a small business. It was just me and a few sales guys, and we would sell pest control door to door for pest control companies. So that's what got my feet wet, so to speak, and having my own business. That was the first thing, and then that led to others. And I don't know how far you want me to go down that road, but that's kind of what.
As far as you want, really.
Okay, so I guess after Orion Marketing, then I started getting the idea that I wanted to start my own pest control company, because as the marketing company, we got a one-time commission, and it was a good commission, but we had to start over every season. We didn't get any residual from those customers. Once we sold them, it was a one-time deal for us. And I saw that we were making these pest control companies wealthy and giving them these residual customers. And I thought, I need to start my own pest control company and sell for myself, and then I'll get both. And so that's when I got the idea to start Insect IQ. And at this time, I was newly married. It was me and Stacy, my wife, and we had one little boy, Austin, and our second little boy on the way. And so we were just, brand new, just young. And between Orion Marketing and Insect IQ, I had a little lawn aeration company too called All Good Lawn Aerations. That was another little side business, just me. Anyway, we started Insect IQ in 2004, January of 2004. And of all the businesses that we've owned, we've had 9 of them so far. That was my baby, so to speak, because that was the one that I put my heart and soul into. That was the one that I bet everything on. Um, I used tax money that really I owed to the IRS to use as my down payment. And if it didn't work, I would have been in a bunch of trouble with the government and had no money. And so we used that money to get a loan from the bank for the rest of the money, and that's kind of how we got it started. And then grew it from nothing to about 6,000 customers by the time we sold it in 2021. And so we had that business for 17 years. And it was the business that I've loved the most out of all of them, because all my kids were born during that one. I just put so much of myself into it. I loved so much about it. The employees that I met, not all of them, but most of them, the customers, just growing the business from nothing to what it was. And when we sold it, it was a very desirable company, had a really good reputation. It was just it was everything I wanted. I never set out for it to be a big company or to sell it. I set out to just to provide a life for my family. That's it.
Yeah.
That was all the further I looked down the road. But then as it went along, it grew and kind of took on a life of its own. And then I had to grow with it and become a leader and lead my employees and all that kind of stuff. And so that whole journey was, I just loved it. And there were hard things, but
Yeah.
overall, I loved it.
Well, and you mentioned how working in these other companies kind of help you acquire the skill and confidence to start your own. And so, if there was someone looking to get into entrepreneurship and start their own business, do you suggest maybe finding some jobs to learn those skills or going straight into it?
I would say most people probably don't want to jump straight into it because not only do you have to learn the skill of whatever your trade is, but there's so much more to learn about it. You have to learn how to forecast your expenses, forecast your cash flow, your sales, and kind of put that all together and kind of extrapolate that out over, say, 12 months or 18 months or 2 years. So you kind of see, well, how much money do we need? How much capital do we need? And how many sales do we have to get? And you have to kind of figure all that out so you know where you're going and you know how much money you need in the beginning. Because most companies fail because they have lack of capital, right? They run out
Yeah.
of money. And so I'd say that's a big thing. I'd say for most people, I think it would be a very good idea to get some experience in your field and go and work for another company and just learn the things that you like that they do and look at the things that you don't like that they do. And it'll give you an idea of, okay, when I have my business, I want to do this because of this. I don't want to do this because of this. And so I think that'll go a long way. And most people, I think, need that. I think it would be a pretty talented person to just jump into a field that they don't have much experience at and
Yeah.
be an entrepreneur, not only learn that skill, but also learn everything else that goes into owning your own business because there's a fair amount to it.
And so you talked about growing your company from pretty much 0 to 6,000. And I guess what I'm looking for is kind of what scaling looked like and things you didn't expect and maybe things you did expect and kind of how that went.
So the scaling actually worked out really well for me. Now I had other friends that had pest control companies, and they scaled really fast. They'd put on 2,000 customers in a summer, and
Oh, wow.
grew way fast and sold it in 5 years for millions and millions of dollars. That was never something that was a goal of mine because I wanted to scale it at a rate that the business didn't run my life. Like it wasn't everything because, I had all my kids. I wanted to go to their things. I wanted to have a life outside of my business. And so I liked the way we scaled it. The way we scaled it was basically we'd add a route a year. And a year is like 500 customers, 560 to 800 to 600 customers. So each year we'd add a technician and a truck and just grow it slowly, predictably, and managed it well that way. And it helped keep our quality super high because when you grow fast, you just lose some quality.
Right.
You just do. It's just there's too many moving parts. And so scaling for us was really manageable and very predictable. And we scaled it slower than most companies, but we did that by design because like I say, I never set out to grow it big to sell it. That was never my end game. There were a number of factors that led into actually selling it, but in the beginning, I never thought of selling it. I just had no intentions of doing that, and I
Yeah.
just wanted to grow it predictably and in a controlled way that didn't just overrun my life.
Yeah. And since you're able to do it slowly and controlled, did you end up keeping all the equity in it?
Yeah.
I think
What
of
was
the
the other
question.
question you asked? You asked about things I didn't expect. I think some of the things that I didn't expect, I guess, in the very beginning, and I learned them quickly. I remember when I worked as a technician, because in the off season between my Orion marketing and starting Insect IQ, in the summertime I ran my marketing company and we did the sales, but in the winter I got to be an employee of the company, which is where I learned the technical end of it and got my licensing. So it worked out really well for me. But I remember running that route and just doing the math on what kind of production I was doing and thinking, geez, there's so much profit in this, but I didn't know all the expenses, right? And
Right.
so one thing I guess that I didn't expect, even though I kind of tried to forecast it, was the expenses are usually more than you think they're going to be. There just are. There's things that
Yeah.
come up you don't think about. You have to factor in attrition rates, and you don't really know what those are going to be until you get into the thick of it. And so some of those things I had to adjust as I went along and kind of temper my goals so they were a little more realistic. So that was one thing that I didn't expect. And then I guess growing it, like I say, I never set out to have employees in the beginning. I just didn't look that far down the road. And so um, one of the things I didn't expect, I guess, was how hard employees were to
Yeah.
manage. If somebody would have asked me when I first started the company, what do you think is going to be the hardest part about it? I probably would have said, gosh, just probably managing all the sales and, taking care of the customers and all that. And that wasn't it at all. It was the employees. It was managing the employees was by far the most difficult part of it, and I didn't expect that.
Yeah.
So
Well, and since we're kind of touching on it, I guess what are some of the other pros and even some of the cons that being in the industry presents?
I think some of the pros of the service industry is your cash flow is very predictable, especially our model. We had 99% of our customers were on a bi-monthly model where we go out every 2 months, we spray, it's a set price, it's a set frequency. They're on a rolling month-to-month contract. I mean, initially 1 year contract, but then after that, it's just month-to-month. And most of the people stay on, they don't cancel. You'll have the customer for years. And so I think that's a huge pro. You contrast that with something like, say, like an HVAC company that doesn't have a recurring business model. Their sales, they may come in and they may make hundreds of thousands of dollars 1 month and 50,000 the next. It's just there's so much ebb and flow there. And with ours, where it was a recurring subscription based model, it was very predictable and very desirable to acquirers. That's what acquirers want when they buy
Right.
your business. The one off stuff doesn't really mean much to them. They won't give you much valuation. But if you have recurring subscription based things, they put a huge premium on that. And so I think that was a huge pro for us. One of the cons of the service industry is I would say you can't make it rich quick like you can in tech. With
Yeah.
tech, if you think of some neat idea, it could just go viral and you can make millions of dollars, in a month. The service industry is not like that. It's slow and steady, but to me that is a pro, because if I just work at it slow and steady and do it right and just rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, time's on my side. It'll just grow,
Yeah.
right? And so that to me is a pro. That might be seen as a con to somebody else who wants that moonshot, who says, I don't want to spend 15 years growing a business. I want to spend 3 and sell it for millions. Well, maybe the service industry isn't necessarily for you unless you have a whole lot of capital to grow fast in the beginning.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Another thing I want to kind of get into is I know that you ended up working and running the business remotely when you moved here to Wyoming. And so maybe just tell us a bit about what that transition looked like.
Yeah, so that actually worked really well. So before I left, the year before we left, I had my general manager, well, who I promoted to be my general manager, his name was Nick. I had him kind of test run it for, gosh, I think we did it for a year before we moved. And I set him up to where he was going to run it as if I wasn't there, and I wasn't going to come into the office for a year. And I just worked from home in the little mother-in-law quarters that we had right out there. Maybe it wasn't quite a year, but anyway, that's how we did that. So we kind of piloted it where I pretended that I wasn't there. I didn't go to the office, and we just saw how it was going to go to make sure when I was 2,000 miles away or whatever it was that it would work well. And so that's how we did it. And with technology, you can do so much of that now. Then when we did that, and same when we moved here, I had monitors and I could see my employees that were in the office. They could see me. We had two-way mics. They could talk to me. I could talk to them. My technicians could call me or FaceTime me or whatever. So it was as if I was there, for all
Yeah.
intents and purposes. And so it really was a smooth transition when we moved. We'd already been doing it for a while, and so we didn't even blink. It was really easy.
Right. What would you say was the most stressful event that happened to you while running that
Oh
business
man,
and how you overcame that?
most stressful event. Gosh, I don't know if I can think of any one singular event, but usually what they revolved around was, again, employees. It was always
Yeah.
employees, and it was an employee quitting. I remember when your mom was having. This was when she was having Elle, and it was like 2 days before she was to go into labor, and we were in the middle of the summer. Elle was born June 1st. Middle of the summer, middle of our busy season. We'd hired this employee. He worked for us for, I don't know, maybe a month. And then usually guys will give you 2 weeks notice, just
Right.
as a courtesy, especially in the busy season. He didn't. He came in that day, said,
Oh
"Hey, I'm out of
man.
here," quit. Didn't even give us reasons as to why, explanation, nothing. And so all of a sudden we're left with a hole
Right.
and we're not a big company. When you only have, say, 13 or 14 technicians and one guy just quits with no notice in the middle of your busy season, that's kind of a big deal.
Right.
It really kills your growth for that year, because you have to shift everybody to servicing your existing customers instead of new customers. And so I remember that one was super stressful. I know there were other employees that did things like that, but I guess how we overcame it, somehow we always got through it. We just did. Everybody would kind of shoulder a little bit extra load. We'd try and hire another guy, which eventually we did. And it always seemed like the sky was falling, but
Yeah.
it never did. It always worked out. It always did. There was nothing that we couldn't overcome. And so eventually we got used to that, knowing, okay, it doesn't matter what happens. We're going to get through it. And we
Yeah.
always did.
And so you definitely say that even when you make it through the start of your business, it's not going to be smooth sailing the whole time for
Oh no,
sure.
no, it's never smooth sailing. And again, it's never smooth sailing because you're working with people, and people, their lives are just like our lives. They changes happen. They're unpredictable, right? You
Yeah.
might lose a loved one. You might break up with your girlfriend. You might have a kid that's sick. You might have financial stress. You might have health issues. You might, whatever it is, there's a number of things. And so their lives are always susceptible to change, sudden change, and that change always bleeds over into work and it affects you. And so you just have to adapt and be and just know things are going to happen. Like it's never smooth. It'll not be smooth for a little bit, but there's always going to be bumps. And usually, like I say, it's usually around your personnel. That's usually what it
Yeah.
is. It's not usually with the customers. You sometimes you get ornery customers or whatever, but you can overcome 99% of their issues by just listening to them and trying to make things right with them. Um, there are other factors, that come in that stress you out, that are not insurmountable, though. Like rising insurance premiums is a huge thing, especially in California with workers' comp and all the different insurances going up. That was hard, but
Yeah.
what can we do? We had to raise our prices, and so that's how we dealt with that. But yeah, generally it was the employees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and so since you've talked about having a good team, I guess, how did you accomplish having an effective workforce?
That was probably the most challenging thing about it, is getting the good people and then holding on to them, because there's a
Yeah.
lot of competition out there. And so for me, the way that we held on to them, I never did figure out a way to interview people where I got really good to where I could say, yeah, this guy's a keeper, this guy's not. You just never know.
Right.
Some guys you think are awesome end up being trash. And some guys you think, I don't know about this guy, turn out to be just workhorses, and just put their head down and do their thing. Um, but the way that we did it is we tried to mirror big companies in the way they paid and in the way they offered benefits, but we tried to be a little company in the way that we serviced, if that makes sense. Because the
Yeah.
big companies, their service is usually not very good. They don't have good
Yeah.
reviews because there's just the right hand doesn't know what the left is doing. And so we made sure our service was a top priority. And then as far as retaining a good team, we gave them the best equipment. Like we bought the best equipment, the best sprayers, the best backpacks, the best uniforms. They had Toyota Tundra trucks with fuel wheels, tinted windows. I mean, just nice, nice stuff. So when they
Yeah.
went to work, their stuff worked, and if it didn't work, it got replaced really fast. That meant a lot to them, and I could tell from just experience of working with them. But then we did things like, we offered a 401k, which we were a small company for that. We offered health benefits, and then we would have a Christmas party that, from what these other people say that came from other companies, we did it bigger than the big companies. I mean, we spent so much money on that, and it was so fun to do that. And so those things make a difference. But then I think the biggest thing in retaining your good people is the way you interact with them. And so I, as an owner, tried to interact with those employees. I tried to give them praise. I tried to talk to them face to face. I just tried to interface with them so that they saw me as somebody they could talk to, somebody who respected them, somebody who appreciated them, not only by words, but also by the way I took care of them with their equipment, by the way I paid them. And so I think that really helped us build a really good team because it made the people want to stay there. They wanted to work there. And a lot of them said that it was such a great place to work. So all those things kind of added up to make it a good atmosphere for them to stay.
Yeah, that definitely sounds really rewarding. And I'm wondering what other parts of being in entrepreneurship and running that business specifically was rewarding to you.
I think, gosh, there's so many things. Like for me, the industry itself to me was very appealing. I loved pest control. I might be seen as a geek that way, but I loved insects. I was the kid that in elementary had ant farms, and I would catch scorpions and put them in mason jars and centipedes and just all kinds of bugs and stuff. And I'd be the kid watching the documentaries on ants and animals and stuff. I always loved that kind of stuff. I didn't think I'd kill them for a living one day, but I think just doing something that you love, that fascinates you, that interests you, and being able to call that work, I think is so rewarding. More than the money, more than anything else, I think it was just enjoyable to do something that I got up and loved to do. And then the business part of it, watching something grow, that something that you start out with just as a logo and an idea. And that's
Yeah.
all you have. You have a clipboard. Back in the day, there were no tablets. I had a clipboard, some blank contracts, some postcards, and a picture of my wife and son on the back of it, and was ready to go knock doors, and a truck, and was ready to work. And I had no customers. And so taking it from that to what it became was just so fulfilling. It was just such a fun ride. And it was hard. Lots of stuff was hard, hard work, hard employees to deal with, hard things, guys crashing trucks, trucks getting stolen, insurance is going up, expenses, all that stuff. But I don't really remember that so much. I just remember the ride. I remember the journey and watching something that you started and created grow into something more than you ever thought it would be. I never thought it would be worth what it was. I never thought it would grow to that. I never had that aspiration, and so that was super rewarding. Um, and then, of course, the money's great too, right? It provided a great living for our family, and that was the main goal of it. That was the main purpose of why I did it in the first place. But I didn't expect all the other stuff that came
Yeah.
along, and I feel very grateful to have been able to experience that.
Well, and so clearly you're really passionate about it. And so, knowing that you sold your business, what made giving up that attachment worth it?
Ooh, that was hard, and if I'm being honest, I didn't know how hard it would be to sell it. So I thought I did, and the reasons that we sold, there were multiple factors why we sold it at the time. Um, and I don't regret it because I feel like talking with your mom, me and your mom, that it was the right thing for us to do and it was at the right time to do it.
Yeah.
And so there's no regret there or doubt that we did the right thing, but that doesn't mean it was easy.
Right.
And so once I sold it, I remember we were walking around in California, me and Stacy, after we had sold it. We were walking around the orchard of our old house where we lived at the time, that we when we were growing the business there. And I remember I got a phone call from the broker who helped us sell the business. And he says, Josh, look at your bank account. Log in and look at your bank account. And I looked because the money had been wired. And there's a ton of money in there. And he said, how does it feel to be rich? Which is a relative term that's subjective, I guess. But I did. I looked at it and I I just didn't know how I felt. I said,
Yeah.
I don't know how I feel. I didn't, I almost wanted to say, I don't want the money. Never mind. Give me my company back. I don't want to do this. And, it was too late then. And like I say, I didn't regret it, but going forward, I didn't expect the sense of loss that I would feel and grappled with that for the last 3 years. And so how did I overcome it? Well, I tried to I don't know if I'll ever overcome it completely, honestly. There will always be a little part of me that will always love that business and will miss that business and what it meant and the memories attached to it. But as far as moving on, starting other businesses, I realized after a couple of years and talking to your mom, and she realized it too. You need to be doing something. You need to be creating something. You need to have
Yeah.
businesses, and it's just something that I enjoy doing, something that's fulfilling, and almost something that I feel like I need in some ways. And so that's helped me to start to move on. I initially got into real estate. That was such a different industry. Definitely, I found out I was not passionate about that. I'm glad I did it because I think it was a smart move financially, but it's not something I was passionate about at
Yeah.
all. And so now, having started these other companies, these pest control companies and the weed control company, I'm way more excited about those because that's something that I love. So.
Yeah. Well, and I know you're really hands on with the weed company, but with Jake Jones, for example, kind of tell us about what it looks like being more on the investor slash mentor side than the man who's running the show.
So I tell you, it's not as much fun so far because I'm the kind of guy that likes to get my hands. I like to work with my hands. I like to. In fact, I was out there spraying longer than I should have been. If you're looking at it from a purely financial standpoint or business growing standpoint, the dumbest thing I could do would be to go out and spray, right?
Yeah.
Because I could hire somebody and use my skills to sell, which is much more valuable to my company. But I didn't enjoy the sales as much as I enjoyed the work. I liked the work. I like going out and meeting the customers and talking to them and solving their problems and being outside and not stuck in a chair. And so that part of it is really fun. Now, switching gears, like with Jake Jones, where I'm not really involved, um, it's just different. I'm more of in a consulting role, overseeing. It is fun to watch him because it reminds me of me when I was that age and starting. And so that's going to be rewarding, I think, and fulfilling to watch him grow something that's his dream for his
Yeah.
family and watch it grow as his kids grow. And to be a part of that is going to be fun. Um, but it is different in that way. Same with Blake, like with Altura, we've grown that. It's been a year now, and we just bought another pest control company, a small one, and merged it with us. And it's been it's been enjoyable, but it's not the same. It's
Yeah.
not the same because I'm not the one there talking to the customers. I'm not talking to the employees. I'm not doing the work, and so it's not the same. It's still rewarding in a way, but I think I enjoy the weed control company more because I get to be involved more in the day-to-day stuff, and I like the actual work too.
Yeah. I guess just one final thing in closing is what advice would you give to someone looking to enter the entrepreneurial field?
I would say take the risk. That's one of the biggest things I would say because you have your whole life, especially if you're young and you're thinking about trying something. I say go for it. Bet on yourself, give yourself a chance, and just see where it takes you because you might be surprised.
Yeah,
Because too many people hate their jobs. Too many people play it safe. They think, I better just go get a job, whether it's, you go to school and get a career that way or you don't. You go learn a trade or something. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm just saying if you have any inkling of wanting to be your own boss or have your own business or you have this idea that you're passionate about, I say take the risk. I say
yeah,
go for it because as speaking as one who did that and who now gets to look back, I wouldn't trade it for the world. Like it was such an enjoyable part of my life. It did so many good things for my family. It was so good for me. It was so good for my wife. Like to struggle with her in the beginning and to pray and to work and to hope, to and to then see that blossom into this business that we never thought that
yeah,
we would have, and to have the relationships that we had with even the customers and the employees, some of them that we talk to this day. And there's just so much good that came out of it and so much joy, even despite the hard parts about it, the hard work. And so
yeah,
I would say bet on yourself, take a chance while you're young. If it fails colossally or spectacularly, at least you can say you tried and you will have no regrets. Versus if you fast forward 20 years from now and you're working, sitting at a desk at a job that you absolutely hate, and now you've got too many obligations, you've got kids, you don't have time or the means to go back and start a business or go learn that skill. It's too late now. You never say never. You can find if there's a will, there's a way, but wow, it'll be so much harder then. And so I would say go for it so that you don't have those regrets later on. If you have any desire, give yourself a chance, give your idea a chance, take the risk.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your advice and your journey with us. And thanks for everyone who tuned in.
You bet.